Welcome back, everybody. I see that the conversations are robust. It's a very well-deserved reunion for most of you, but we will be starting our conversations, so if you could just take your seats, that'd be good. Well, before we head on to our first session, just an important reminder, we'd love to hear from you. And if you take a look at your tables, when you go back to your tables, you will see a QR code. And that QR code is our poll. We want to give us your reactions and feedback to how this is going for you, so you may access it now. So the QR code is in the middle of your tables. And if you do answer our poll, you automatically qualify for our special raffle today. You may claim your prizes at the AIM booth. All right, so let's head on to our first session, the fourth. AFES invites us to embody purpose-driven leadership, overcoming uncertainty together, shaping conversations that drive leadership, economic innovation, and environmental impact. As our keynote speaker had advised us, Ban Ki-moon said, purpose is all about global citizenship. It is leading with purpose and also leading with passion and compassion. But how do we do so? What are the tools that we need? So we'll be discussing this in our first session. So to start off, we discuss how to navigate global disruption strategically. As enterprises embrace their role in driving sustainable progress, they must also contend with the increasingly complex global environment shaped by uncertainty and disruption. The very forces that challenge cooperation, including geopolitical tensions, economic realignments, and shifting alliances, are redefining how all of the organizations here operate and collaborate across borders. So building on the call for purpose-driven leadership, our first session turns the spotlight on how the enterprises navigate these emerging realities. This session brings together thought leaders from security, sustainability, enterprise risk to examine how organizations can adapt, mitigate risks, and lead responsibly amid a rapidly changing world order. As your session moderator, I am honored to introduce our three esteemed panelists. She is the head of Asia and Oceania region at the United Nations Global Compact, leading its regional hub in Bangkok. She works with 15 country networks and regional stakeholders to advance sustainable development, overseeing global governance and compliance, and brings over 13 years of UN experience managing programs such as the UN Global Compact's anti-corruption portfolio and collective action initiatives with businesses worldwide. So please welcome Ms. Neha Das. Our second panelist is the Director for Enterprise Risk Management. He has been part of International Container Terminal Services, Inc., or ICTSI, initially as a senior manager in Enterprise Risk Management and later promoted to the position of Director. He is skilled in Enterprise Risk Management, internal audit, auditing, financial audits, and Sarbanes-Oxley Act compliance. Please welcome Mr. Jerico Matawaran. Our third and final panelist is an independent scholar specializing in international relations, security, and comparative defense policy. He has served in multiple Thai government administrations, including as chair of the Prime Minister's Security Advisory Committee from 2019 to 2023, and advisor to Thailand's National Security Council, bringing extensive expertise in national security and regional affairs. He is known as a leading commentator on Thailand security and international relations with publications from Stanford, Oxford, and the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, and regular appearances on national and international media. Please welcome Dr. Panitan Wattanayagorn. before we begin, I just wanted to thank our panelists here. I've had a moment of a conversation last night, which was really interesting and robust, and all in the audience for just being here. With the inclement weather, I understate that, but then how brave of everybody to come around and do some good for the greater good, and to convene in a country that is so ravaged by the typhoons. It also sets the template, doesn't it? That climate instability is one of the themes, but the theme that we discussed today is about global geopolitical shifts, maybe even disruptions in a very broad sense. And I wanted to take up to our panelists what they see as the biggest risks right now that we have to be wary of in businesses. But I also want this to be a conversation. So if you could just take part, I would love for you to do that. There is a QR code. I believe it's over there. If you could just capture that with your mobile phones and key in your questions whenever and wherever you want. You know, maybe a thought came up. It doesn't have to be a question. If you just wanted to share a view, that'd be great. So please keep that in mind. But if that's not going to interest you and you've got the courage to come up to the microphone, please do so. We will spend some time, maybe 10, 15 minutes, raising of the hands. We have our ushers carrying the microphones to come to you, so you can ask the question personally to our panelists. So let's get started and ask about those geopolitical risks. And I wanted to start with Dr. Panitan, because you come from a very interesting space, having represented the security alliance with the chairman. You've been very much involved in providing advice. You're retired now, but you're so very much involved, media chasing you here and there, with every uprising that happens in your part of the globe. As we all know, President Trump had brokered a truce between your country and Cambodia. And on this template, we discussed geopolitical shifts. You talked about balance, or the lack thereof, the imbalance. Where are we now, from your point of view, on the state of balance in ASEAN?
Well, thank you for introducing me and inviting me. Thank you for very kind, warm welcome from the organizations. I think we are at the crossroads, moving toward a more equilibrium, not yet there. We are, I think, at war with ourselves, with changes, with disruption, with neighbors. And of course, we need to achieve a better balance. You can see President Trump is trying to change ASEAN Summit into a Trump Summit. You know, we have lost that balance. We have lost that centrality. But he's trying to achieve peace. That's good for us. That's good for our prosperity. But I think we have to achieve that our own ways. So I think we have to work more harder, to achieve peace. We are at war, and the world is moving toward maybe more a troubled waters. At a global level, if you are not careful, we could go to total war, as the Foreign Affairs Journal indicated last year. This total war is quite different from the last wars, the last great war that we were in during the Cold War. You see the changes in battlefields in Europe, Ukraine, and Russia, in the Middle East, in Asia, between Thailand and Cambodia. It's all different wars. This is a challenge of our lifetime to achieve peace. But before we achieve peace, we must understand the conditions for war. I think the disruption is part of it. That's one major point. We are moving toward a total war. We need to stop that. We need to make sure that we help each other in a better cooperation to stop that at ASEAN, at APEC, at ASEP, at United Nations. I think we need to work more harder. Secondly, not at the global level, at the regional level. You see the continuation, the continuum of conflicts. No one thinks that President Trump can stop any of these wars for certain, but at least he may try. I think the wars in the Middle East will continue in a new phase. The war in Myanmar is now moving into the new phase. I've met with many of the armed separatist groups in the south from Myanmar, the ethnic armed groups. No one believes that we can end those wars this year. It's a continuation of conflicts. We need to slow them down. We need to make sure that they are not expanding. At least we can do that. And lastly, of course, at the domestic level, you are facing disruption from environmental disasters, political instabilities, economic challenges. So we need a new cooperation, new enterprises, new ways of put together a better balance to achieve peace and prosperity at a global level, regional level, domestic level. And in that we can do through United Nations, to ASEAN, to a better cooperation with private enterprises, with young people. So this is my thinking at the National Security Council. Today, our National Security Council is meeting right as we talk to decide what to do after our Prime Minister put a ceasefire on hold yesterday.
Exactly, and that's the news I came to you with, that it didn't last very long. The truce was ended because of what's happened at the border, so it didn't last very long. I wanted to pick up on the word disruption and your focus on the youth, because it's interesting that you make a mention of how the youth is disrupting the status quo around the world. When you look at Cambodia, Indonesia, Nepal, Madagascar, Morocco, it's all happened over the last maybe few months, and it's also happening here. We've had the September 21 protests and another one potentially coming up on a National Heroes Day. I wanted to know from Neha, because you work with businesses, how do you advise then businesses who are faced with, if I may put it, an existential threat or maybe opportunity for change that may disrupt the way enterprises work?
Thanks, Cathy. It's a very deep question, and I'll try to endeavor and share some thoughts, and also keen to hear from other panelists. First of all, what a strong start to the day. And in many ways, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon sort of set the tone for how we as society, as businesses, as policymakers can navigate disruption. So at least one strong message that came out was we have to work collectively. We have to partner with each other and work with each other. Now, whatever Professor Panitan said, it's not happening in isolation. Businesses also are affected by it, because if there's political instability, business cannot operate as usual, right? So one of the most important things is, I would say, drawing also from His Excellency's speech, is collective action. Coming together, government, civil society, business enterprises, working towards a common objective. And the world has that common objective. We don't have to go and find it. It's the Sustainable Development Goals. It's the climate agreement. We have an objective to work towards, right? Because it doesn't mean that, it's something morally right to do or the right thing to do. It is, but it is also profit with purpose. Because if the communities are healthy, the environment is safe, there is political stability, businesses will also thrive, right? So I think instead of being reactive, we have to, and the Global Compact and His Excellency also referred to this, we are UN's private sector initiative, right? So we bring together companies from around the world towards this common objective of SDGs and the 4 areas that he mentioned: human rights, labor, environment, anti-corruption. So collective action is one thing, and not being reactive, but actually preempting, sort of like planning for what is to come. Right, so if there's a crisis, sure, we come out of the crisis, but then business has to play a role of shaping what the world looks after that. Like post-pandemic, you saw a lot of enterprises stepping up and now creating, getting health insurance for their employees, something as basic as that, because they realize it's not a good thing to do if their employees and the communities in which they operate are not safe, then their factory shut down.
So
So
have
it's
the
also
business-
driven by an objective, right?
Have businesses figured it out? Because whatever's happening in front of us is unprecedented.
Right.
The US president dropping off twice on the Paris Agreement. SDGs are under attack, if you will. DEI has suddenly become quite an issue for governments and businesses. What are we learning then? If you would call this an opportunity, what are businesses doing ahead?
That's, yes, the US president withdrew from the climate agreement, and there is an ESG backlash in North America, as you can see. But at the same time, companies are adopting carbon emission standards voluntarily, right? They also operate not just in the United States, they operate across borders. And so they also, for example, are driven by the regulations that the European Union has put together. So trade and commerce across boundaries also influence the action of companies. Voluntary standards, disclosures, when they operate outside of the country, what are the requirements in those countries? These are also some driving factors. And I think most importantly, businesses can be advocates for responsibility and accountability. Sure, they can. The impact that businesses have on markets, on communities, on consumer behavior is unprecedented. So if they are setting sort of the right tone in their products, in their manufacturing, in their commitments, then the societies are also sort of like, they go through that mindset change and they see what's out there. I mean, you see the advertisements around the world. You can point fingers at them, but at the same time, a lot of them are also talking about sustainability, circularity, reuse, recycle, those kind of messages the businesses can adopt in their own practices, but also give it out to the society. So I do believe that with those collective action initiatives and sort of like planning ahead, these threats can turn into opportunities. And then working closely with the stakeholders, with the governments, with the policymakers. I was speaking with Dr. Panitan and Jerico yesterday, and they were saying that, the policymakers also consult with them about what's next, what is the new trend, how do we adapt. So these kind of dialogues and what is happening today here in the forum also sort of set the tone for that collective spirit and partnership.
Let me get to Jericho because you are a case study, if you will, in the business sector. You are spread out across the world. If I get this right, it's 6 continents, 33 terminals, and 19 countries. So imagine the kind of collaboration and collective action you'd have to do with all the different governments to get business to work for ICTSI. How would you assess yourself in the way that you're working ahead of these concerns, whether geopolitical or not?
Okay, first of all, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Cathy. Thanks for having me here. To answer your question, I'd like to give a background first about how ICTSI operates. So, as mentioned, we are operating in 6 continents, 19 countries with 33 terminals. We operate in a decentralized business model in which every port is led by its CEO and with regional oversight. And each port has commercial strategies. And our leadership team are empowered to make decisions that they need to create value in each port. So, in addition to that, we also have our corporate office who provides guidelines to these terminals, provide governance policies, risk management framework, and to some extent, some shared services. And in terms of risk management, we are using our own risk dictionary, which we periodically update. So this risk dictionary covers most of the risk in the industry and that will affect the business. And the business units and corporate offices are performing risk assessment twice a year, and then we have a board risk oversight committee meeting every quarter. So in this kind of structure, we are able to identify, prioritize risks, and mitigate those that really matters to the organization.
You mentioned a dictionary, you said, a risk dictionary. Very interesting. I mean, how has that changed with Trump's tariffs? I mean, is that part of the dictionary? And which page is that when you do like supply chain, supply chain disruptions?
Well, interestingly, the Trump tariffs do not have direct impact to the organization as of now. But at the closest, I think our chairman already mentioned this in one of the press releases, the closest terminal that may have be impacted by this is our terminal in Mexico. But as of now, it's still wait and see. But speaking of our risk dictionary, it's a broad dictionary which covers commercial competition, those that will affect ESG, and we're also using the globally or publicly available references in terms of risk report, and we also do benchmarking in order to make sure that our risk dictionary covers those risks that are relevant in achieving our goals.
Interesting, very interesting. I wanted to go back to Dr. Panitan. As we all know, we're hosting ASEAN next year. So it's an exciting year for us. It's our turn. But it's also very fraught with challenges, I would like to think, because you just talked about the imbalance and the kind of hostaging, did you say? Trump taking away ASEAN and making it Trump's ASEAN. How can we then take a step up, and grab it back and make it the ASEAN centrality the way we want to see it?
Thank you, Cathy. I'm very glad we talked about this last night. We are very much hopeful that with the Philippines leadership, by the way, the Filipinos know the Americans best in the region. You were with them for many years. So I think with the Filipinos leadership, I think we can bring back the centrality, the equilibrium. But it will be a lot of challenges as the Chinese is moving in closer and closer, to the center of the ASEAN centrality. And by the way, I think President Trump coming here, turning ASEAN summit to a Trump summit in the first half is not that bad, because the Chinese is also turning ASEAN summit to the Chinese summit also in the second half. So it's up to the Philippines to make a better balance next year to make sure that both superpowers still interested in ASEAN summit more than before, but get better, balance compared to the Malaysian leadership this year. With high respect for Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, I think he has not done quite well in terms of balancing, but with great difficulties, because Mr. Trump coming here with high tariff, tax, and pressuring all countries, particularly Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, to sign a MOU on the rare earth, and many more. Now we are now achieving a lower tariff, about 19%, but still negotiations continue. So that is one thing to look for next year for the Philippine leadership. But secondly, I'm afraid that it's not so good news. The speed, the responsive, the policy makers that you talk about, response to these challenges from superpowers, from regional conflicts. The time is now pressed from days to hours. I remember very well in 1997 economic crisis. I was head of the Prime Minister Chuan Lik Pai working group. At night, I was connecting a call from Secretary Kofi Annan, Madame Albright, to Prime Minister at night, midnight, because United Nations wanted Thailand to send peacekeeping to Timor. So I connected. We had days to prepare to send our troops the first big troop to Timor, the UNAMID, UNTAED, Interfed, UNAMID, and then UNTAED forces. Those we have days to prepare. Now policymakers have only hours to respond to the up and coming crisis. Next year will be more challenges. And in your business, Cathy, you don't have hours. You have minutes.
Seconds.
Seconds to respond to
fake
this
news.
TikTok,
Yes.
era. So I'm afraid that if you do not prepare well, if you do not anticipate the up and coming crises, the challenges will be much greater to respond domestically, regionally, and internationally. We have moving into a real big troubled waters. At the global level, the bigger wars in our lifetime could erupt. According to the US NSC report, the Russians are now getting ready to engage in the bigger wars with Europe, as you can see. And that is potentially very harmful for the global business climate. We need to stop that. We need to engage that. We need to make sure that it's slowed down. Deterrence, maybe, is returning, but it's not enough. The old deterrence is not enough anymore. It's too complex. Cooperation, yes, it's a better way, but still, you need a much deeper cooperation. We talked about that last night. You need to reach deeper into the policy making levels at the highest level. So our Prime Minister is approaching that at the ASEAN Summit. You can see our Prime Minister, moving closer to the US one-on-one, personally. Challenge him to reduce the tariff. And then moving closer to the Chinese leadership, private conversation on record that the Chinese need to do more for Thailand. And our king, for the first time this month, the first state visit, will travel to China. This is just announced 2 days ago. So that better balance must be done in a more compressed time. Business leader knows that.
Which poses us a problem then. I mean, we were just talking about being ahead, helping businesses get ahead of the disruption, the geopolitical shift, but time's compressed. And when economics is weaponized, it gets a little bit more difficult to navigate for enterprises. Let's take, for instance, DEI, because this has been very, very contentious. How has that changed the way businesses approach DEI and their sustainability goals as a company? If they're a global company, how do they now operate in a space where in the ASEAN and Asia, we're progressing on that front? I'd like to think we are, unless I'm mistaken. Neha.
I think when you encounter an issue, sometimes you have like a knee-jerk reaction and you just want to firefight, or you want to come up with some sort of short-term resilience. There's a supply chain disruption because there's a disaster happening somewhere, a climate crisis, which has led to humanitarian crisis, and my supply chain is totally disrupted. Yeah, take for example. And then you think of something like quick fix. How do I do? Maybe I move manufacturing here. Maybe I have to complete, if it's a manufacturing company, I have to deliver on my order. Let's find a quick fix, or let's figure it out, That mindset needs to change now. Because I think you mentioned DDR, and you mentioned, and it's not just, of course, resilience to disaster, but risk management and a lot of other things. I mean, now trade is becoming very risk-prone. Who knew in January that some of the companies will be facing a lot of tariff when they are, trading their goods outside of their, or to the United States or to some other countries, right? So the change in mindset has to go from short-term resilience to long-term sustainability, because sustainability and longevity are sort of like two sides of the same coin. If you have corporate sustainability embedded in your business strategy, then you don't give knee-jerk reactions. You have already anticipated and prepared for a scenario where there could be supply chain disruptions. Then what do you do to address it? You make your supply chain resilience. You make the suppliers, the small SMEs that you work with, resilient to DDR, to a global health pandemic, to trade and tariff barriers. You upskill them, you invest in them. You're not just bothered about completing the next order or delivering on the next target, but you see how in the long term, 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, you are building supply chains that can stand up to pressures from outside, right? How do you do it? I think, of course, you reach out to experts and you figure it out, but you also have to see that it's not just about technically stronger supply chains. It's about environment, society, and governance as a whole in a package, right? So if there's no transparency and accountability, the best of your policies will fail because they'll be on paper, but they won't be implemented. How do you report on what you have achieved? How do you disclose? How do you tell the world what you're doing? What steps are you taking? Sure, you have set your carbon emission standards and you are greening your process because maybe the laws require it. But what are you doing about, equal pay or equal wage for women, having women represented in senior management? Because there are a lot of studies that prove all those things are profitable. They're not just, there on the side, which you do as a CSR activity. They actually, when you have more women in your senior management, decision-making also takes care of 50% of the workforce, arguably, right? So as a whole package, what kind of response are you preparing? What are you doing? And one of the important things is also, I think in this scenario, like I think Philippines and Asia region as a whole, maybe if you think of even a decade back, DDR was not a mainstream term. The UN was talking about it, maybe governments, some academia here and there. Now it's mainstream. People are talking about disaster resilience. Some of the companies in Philippines are part of the foundation that works on it and has collectively brought people together. Office for, it's called OCHA, Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and UNDP have a collective program called Connecting Business Initiative, which has presence in the Philippines. Then UN's disaster DDR department or office, the Risk Resilience Office, has Arise Philippines, which is a branch which has companies participating in it, sharing stories, sharing ideas, sharing thoughts about how to become more resilient towards climate disasters, right? So mainstreaming of these things are also evident of the fact that there is more response. It's, as I said in the beginning, it's not knee-jerk, it's part of how your business operations work.
I'll pick up on the acronyms you mentioned, ESG, because it is interesting, Jerico, that you've just launched an ESG-linked reorganization. And this is very critical for a company who's so exposed to the global events as you do business. How do you connect that now that you've been reorganized according to ESG? How does that connect with supply chain, sustainability, and sustainability at the top?
Okay, let me first give a background about the leadership we have on ESG. In fact, some members of the sustainability team from ICTSI are here. We are driving sustainability through prudent leadership. So, we've been doing this, I think, back since 2017. We've been working on that. We've been a member of UNGC since 2023. We have established the ESG board committee that convenes periodically to review issues and address them, some risks and concerns related to ESG. We have the Chief Sustainability Officer, which is Mr. Christian Gonzalez, also our EVP. And we have the Global Sustainability Team, who is driving synergy across departments. And we have sustainability champions, comprising of senior executives and management personnel at the corporate level and at the business units. So this collaborative approach on ESG ensures that our sustainability efforts are data-driven, transparent, and impactful, contributing to a more sustainable future. Now, in terms of our ESG strategy, we're covering act on climate change. So it means that we pledge significantly to reduce our carbon footprint, optimizing energy efficiency using green machine equipment, carbon neutral, and we also protect ecosystems, which includes responsible water management, minimizing pollution, proactively conserving natural resources. We also operate according to responsible business practices. So as responsible corporate citizen, we uphold the highest ethical standards in all our operations. So this includes transparent governance practices, anti-corruption measures, commitment to fostering positive relationships within our supply chain, stakeholder groups, and local communities, and most importantly, ensure the well-being of our people. So it means that we are dedicated to fostering safe, inclusive, and rewarding work environment. And this encompasses health, safety, decent working, economic growth, and equality, diversity, and inclusion. So that's how we cover ESG in terms of our initiatives to sustainability.
And you went ahead with that, even though America looked like it wasn't going to be part of sustainability.
Yeah.
How come?
How can I say this? Even before, because we are operating in a diverse environment, we want to make sure that our operations are responsible enough, not only to do business, but also to be responsible in terms of the communities where we work in. So.
That is interesting. So it's not just what's going on geopolitically that should guide the leadership, but really the community you serve and keeping sustainable, to keep your business sustainable. I'm not seeing any questions here in front of me. Doesn't anybody have a question? This is such an interesting discussion. Yes, I've seen a hand raised. Good to see you again, sir. The microphone's coming to you. If you could just introduce yourself for our panel.
My name is Ilac Diaz. I'm from the Masters of Entrepreneurship. And I was looking at the OCHA report on disasters, and it says 60 to 80% of humanitarian funds are spent on logistics after the disaster strikes. That means when the disaster strikes, such a large amount does not go to the beneficiaries, but the logistics. How can business hyper-localize solutions so that we don't have to transport or put such a large amount on logistics rather than on the impact itself? And especially for reoccurring challenges, right? It's too expensive to spend so much on that.
How expensive is it, Jericho? You're in logistics.
It's a difficult question.
Very difficult question, he says.
Well, I think what I can share is what we have done during the pandemic. Even if the world stopped at the time, the port operations is actually one of the frontliners in delivering goods around the world. In fact, if I remember it right, we have good results in 2020 and 2021. But I think in terms of the costs of logistics, like for example, with the Red Sea conflict, with the Suez Canal, it actually impacted the cost of fuel, the rerouting the ships through South Africa or towards Africa. But this actually impact the business initially, but because we are able to understand the risk and impact of these disruptions, we act immediately to address it. So somehow at the end of the year, we're able to reach the target in terms of volume. So I hope that answers the question.
So comparatively, it's more expensive to transport during a war than to distribute relief for any pandemic or endemic. Interesting. I've seen a question here online, if I could now post this to our other panelists. Geopolitical tensions often force enterprises to choose between meeting local demands for self-sufficiency and adhering to global standards and free trade principles. When mandates clash, which one takes strategic precedence? Is it the local, regional political imperative or the global efficiency imperative? Dr. Panitan.
Well, I think we have to do multi-dimensional responses at the same time. The nature of the disruption is multi-dimensional, real-time, over time. So we must have a better integration systems. I'm very much interested in Jericho's, thinking about how to integrate his system, but for the government. In the Cold War, the business sector, take the examples of the efficiency of the Cold War machines, internet communications, rapid deployments. But now it's the other way around. We need to learn from the business how to integrate our government responsive systems. Better AI, better localized manufacturing, higher tech systems. If you look around governments in ASEAN, it's very outdated. In Europe, it's way outdated. In the US, it's better. In China, it's very good. The way they respond to their natural disaster is quite impressive, using integrated systems. But these integrated systems, the techniques, the cost, right now may be higher. But over time, the big win is going to be cheaper, lower. So we can respond to those. The National Security Council, I argue to my council, you need to work 24 hours. You need to have two teams. One during the day, one during the night. You can use an automation AI to follow the crises and wake up your prime minister at night, as I did when I was at the government house. I finished my work at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. I return in the morning for prime minister's coffees at 6 a.m. But now we can have that integration using a cheaper, and by the way, the cheaper technology is existed in the private sector. Drones. You can use drones, agricultural drones, bought in Thailand, in wars in Myanmar. The Chinese drone is still expensive. The PDF coming to Thailand to buy agricultural drones and redesign themselves. Weaponize them, this drone. It's much cheaper than the Chinese drones, than Russian drones, of course. So the response to these multi-dimensional disruptions must be real-time, over time, must be integrated at a higher level, using business experiences. But it's going to be difficult. The resistance from the national level government will be very high because they have their own kingdoms. They have their own SOPs, operating systems. The UN has their own operating systems. I try to argue to her boss, Miss Gina, to integrate 50 offices, more than 50 offices of UN offices in Thailand to our cabinet system. Integration achieved in the last few years. And now the United Nations in Thailand submit their plan to our cabinet. So they can integrate their local programs financed partially by the Thai government. The Southern Project is one pilot project. It's a big win. UN has youth programs in the Southern Muslim provinces, my hometown. For the first time, Thai cabinet can participate in the UN projects at the local level. So integrations must be done at the global level, but operation must be done at the local level with the United Nations plans, for more equal opportunity, more integrity, more local cultures. I think the UN plans, I looked at it in the last few years, very good, but they don't have money. But the Thai government can support some of the money, to this. So a better partnership, a new kind of partnership, using integration, using technology, using the localized, empowered youth and local civil society organizations. And by the way, in my hometown in southern Thailand, 10 miles from Malaysian borders, international offices are now opening up. There are local offices, ICRC, for example, and others. We were invited, the United Nations, to open regional offices in southern Thailand, but your boss told me that you don't have money. So I went back to my government and said, well, why don't you find some money, for them to operate from Hat Yai, from Songkhla provinces. It's a very interesting response to this disruption. I think we can do it, but it must be fast because the responsive time is compressed. So, in short, you counter these forces with old ideas of investing more in defense. The defense spending is all rise up in Europe, in Asia. So you do that. You make sure that defense industries are now up and running, and now it's one of the very interesting enterprises. According to CIPRI in Stockholm, this is one of the more prosperous, industries, defense industries. So you do that, but at the same time, at the national level and local level, you must have a new system to integrate, the decision-making process to counter that. ASEAN has to do that.
So that's
members-
global integration and local operationalization.
Using
With the use of AI.
using AI and localized, startups.
Got that. That's a whole lot of collaboration. I'm seeing a hand over there, and I'd love to hear from you, ma'am, if you can state your name and your designation.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Erin Downey. I'm with the Zulik School of Development Management. My perspective comes, and thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. My question comes from the perspective of the right to health and the responsibility to protect it, especially in the regions where we know we are seeing far more impacts from climate, and our communities and the stability of our communities are being affected by them. It seems to me, and I hope that you all could speak to this issue, that redoubling our efforts on the strengthening of our healthcare systems to be more resilient, one as an economic engine for all of our communities, and then to be more resilient when we face these crises and disasters, so that we're not drawing on our logistics expenses more and more, because strong healthcare systems in non-crises tend to function better in crises. So I'm just asking or wondering if you all could speak to the issue of strengthening healthcare that, by the way, represents about 70% women. So it seems to me that it checks a lot of boxes of things that we're trying to strengthen. Thank you.
Neha, where is the UNGC in terms of healthcare?
The UN Global Compact directly doesn't work on healthcare issues, but the UN does, through WHO and UNAIDS, which is closing down. When the pandemic happened, we noticed that the Western countries were not only able to access vaccines for their citizens, but also they were able to store and hoard a lot of vaccines for their citizens. Whereas, on the other hand, also in Asia, many of us didn't have access to the vaccines on time. They were out in the world, but we just didn't have access because at that time, the countries were all thinking about themselves. And there was such a stark disparity between the developed and developing countries. And the UN was trying very hard to bridge that gap and talk to those that have access, to give access to those that don't. And a lot of things are happening, and then, we were successful in some ways. And a few years down the line, and in 2024, I think majority of the countries chose new governments, and now, I mean, Dr. Panitan also mentioned about it, we have severe funding cuts, and WHO is one of those organizations that have been severely hit, right? And we are not able to conduct our operations in the way we could have if we had that funding that was available. But our role, or the importance of this neutral platform, UN-led body's role in bridging that gap between haves and have-nots was very important. Everybody saw it, and yet there was a funding cut, right? So I know it's not a direct answer to your question, but what I wanted to say is that you can see that was at the global level, and you can see sort of like similar things being played out more locally, more regionally even. You talked about, strengthening healthcare systems, and women and are the most affected if they're not, and that is true. But the disparity and the income inequalities also come into play. The poor people do not have access to good health care, but at the same time, those who can, they can go to private hospitals. Why is that? Of course, there has to be investment in government hospitals and in subsidized healthcare access, things, universal health insurance and things like that, and women should be made primary beneficiaries. Not directly related, but I have an example from the Philippines. There's a small company called Bio Manila. I'm sure many of you know about it. You've heard about it. They've been really recognized for working with. They're into sustainable fashion, but they're working with women artisans and women weavers in the communities in which they operate in the provinces to economically uplift them. And we recognize their work as an impact story in our organization. And I was talking to the owner, Anna Lagon, and I was asking her, so what change did you see? What if there were male weavers and male artisans? You would have still done your work sustainably, right? And she said that, these women, so their weavers are, I think, 90% are women. And the distributors and the farmers that they source from are also like 90 to 100% women, right? And she told me that, what the difference is? That when I economically empower these women by sourcing from them, by training them to become weavers, the money that they get, they invest in the health of their family, the education of their children, right? And they pass the skill on. They teach their neighbors and women and girls in their communities how to weave, what is sustainable raw materials, how to use, how to recycle. You see that the health of the communities have improved. You see that their children are going to school, right? And, well, everybody knows of the saying, you empower a woman and then you empower the community, you empower the family. So at a grassroots level, businesses can do that. They can support more women in the workplace, and you see automatic improvements in the access to healthcare education within the community. But at a very macro level, policies should also support that. Business doesn't operate in isolation. It needs an enabling environment. What is the incentive or subsidy provided to a small SME like Bio to do that? I don't know, but there should be. Financial incentive, policy incentive. Of course, their story is recognized and it's an example. But when it boils down to numbers, I really call on the people who make the decisions to actually, invest in the infrastructure in healthcare and women's empowerment, but also incentivize those grassroots level SMEs, enterprises, foundations, organizations that are working for it. So a little bit of a roundabout answer, but hopefully we'll get there, and hopefully WHO will continue to be funded and to do the work that it is supposed to be done.
We have a question here online, and this takes us back to geopolitics and the friendships we have in the region. What has ASEAN been doing to gain more and more protection and insulation from American and Chinese business, economic, and political interests in the region? Dr. Panitan.
Cathy, remember we talk about ASEAN way, the
Yes.
real way.
The real way, the unofficial way.
Yes, last
Maybe
night.
you could share that with
You
the
can share it
audience.
to the
The
audience.
unofficial way is,
National interests of each country.
going at it on your own,
Yes.
discussing tariff negotiations on your own rather than as ASEAN.
And this is not according to me, according to my late friend, the
All right.
former ASEAN Secretary, Dr. Surin Pitsuwan.
So this is reality.
It is a rarity.
How can we break away from that, learning
less
from
than
the lessons?
50% agreements between ASEAN members, now 11 countries, are not honored. More than 70% is not honored. At that time when Surin was the chair of the ASEAN.
So again, if we were to answer this question, and since we're hosting ASEAN,
So the Chinese, the Americans, they know that. They know that it's better to work with different ASEANs individually. This
but is
president,
it good
this
for the
pre-
ASEAN? Is it good for ASEAN to
No,
actually
it's
work
not good for
individually?
ASEAN. This is not the intention
How
of
can
ASEAN.
you convince then everybody that we have to work
It's going to
together?
be difficult. This Trump trip, this time to ASEAN summit, that represents 68%, 300 some billions US dollars trade with the US. So big interest for President Trump to win the concessions, and he did win the concessions. But for ASEAN, Malaysia wins more than Cambodia. Vietnam may win more than Thailand. It is a real problem. Before sitting down talking to President Trump bilaterally, they should have sit down. They should have sat down and talked together. At least 3 or 4 key countries: Malaysia, Vietnam, or Thailand. To talk about this rare earth, to talk about these new military corporations, including Cambodia at the military basis with the US and China. So in order to reverse that, I think the strengthening of ASEAN must be done more quickly. Integration, new kind of leadership. That's why we hope Philippines can do it.
Are you
next-
hopeful?
Of
Because
course.
we're both friends with China and
I'm a
the
fan of
Philippines.
ASEAN. So I'm hopeful. And by the way, ASEAN is one of the most successful, regional corporations. Besides UN at the global level, I think ASEAN, as we talked about it last night, are doing much more for the environment, for development, SDGs. So, and they have empowered the people to do that. So I think this is a challenge, but I think we need to redesign ASEAN, to face up with this new geopolitical shift. The rivalries between China and United States is not accident. It's not accident. And it happened before with power rivalries. It's now leading us to bipolarity. But ASEAN intention is to lead us to the multipolarity. So we need to keep that track. But in keeping that track, government cannot do it alone. We are too weak. Now you need to have ASEAN lead by empower global citizens at the local level. That's why we bring in the fourth pillar of ASEAN. Years ago, remember, we bring in not only political, foreign affairs, not only economic leadership, not only social leaders, but bring in NGOs, private enterprises. We need to have that fourth pillar of ASEAN to lead the way. We need to turn ASEAN into a new leadership empowered, by global citizens from ASEAN countries. But it's going to be a challenge. I cannot even sing the ASEAN anthem. It's written by Thai, so it's a long way to go. But But still, I think this is a good platform. The financial, crisis that took place, Tom Yam Kung, show us that we originated from Thailand, show us that Thailand can hold on to this crisis. The Chiang Mai initiative, still talk about it at APEC, still talk about it at Summit, ASEAN Summit. So you have many good platforms, but you need to modernize this ASEAN, platform, using high tech, using empowered groups of new citizenship, youth, for example. But we have a rise in a new political power in Thailand, a young generation put together, a biggest, most successful party, political party. Many of them are my ex-students. One of them became prime minister. They don't have experience, but they have technologies, they have knowledge.
Let's pick up on technology. I'm seeing a question here that says it isn't something that is inherently good nor bad. So that's the view of our asker. In this regard, how do you think technology improves the way how businesses and nations respond to global disruptions? More so in the financial setting, do you think it plays a part in decreasing systemic risks? I'm thinking Jerico might have a thought here.
I think in terms of technology and in relation to disruption, again, my example would be what happened in the pandemic period. So we learned how to work remotely. We were forced to become, CIO in our own home. So I think that one example is a testament that technology is able to help us in terms of disruptions. So a lot of people, for example, in our case, at the corporate office of ICTSI, we work remotely during that time. Actually, up to now, there are some work from home arrangements. We still have that. Same with the business units in different terminals around the world. So there are certain functions that can remotely work so in order to deliver. So I think that one example I can share in terms of technology in relation to disruptions.
Yes, Dr. Panitan.
As a national member of the National Cyber Security Committee, I think my answer is the technology not decreasing, but increasing the risks. I think this is very clear. The ways economic transactions using online scam centers, huge problem now in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Thailand, in Singapore, in Vietnam, in Malaysia, you name it, they have scam centers in different ways. This is from a high-tech Starlink, internet, different kinds of deeper cryptocurrencies, bitcoins. This system is so challenging for any security agency to go after them. You cannot go after them easily. The best, the most sophisticated people on earth with the highest certificates of cybersecurity, some of them are working for the crimes syndicates, not for us. Same in Latin American countries. This is why I think it is a dark side of technology, but you can turn it around. You can turn it around by creating a much better platform, like Singapore is now doing, like Japan is now doing, like many European countries are now doing. But it's expensive, it's controversial. It may be also impact your personal data privacy. But if you don't do that, you cannot go after them. And they are now going much deeper into connectivities. So I think the risk is high, but the benefits, if you can manage it with a new platform, you have to create a new systems, create a new laws, integrating, these risks into the better system, not separating them into platforms, data, personal data, and different agencies. In doing that, in Thailand we have more than 20 agencies combating that same crime. You cannot do that anymore. It's costly. It's ineffective. You need to have a centralized one center.
Could
But now
ASEAN
that go against our culture. Bureaucracy culture. You have to have a
could
separate.
ASEAN be the solution to that and be the platform? Because it's a shared challenge amongst all of us, and it's not political. This is personal.
Yes.
So we can.
But you can.
Get
You have
together.
a platform. You have to go back to ASEAN TC, Transnational Crime, working group, and redesign that platform.
Is there political will in there to get together?
Well, now there is a new political will from younger generation leadership in ASEAN. In smaller countries like Singapore, you can see a clear political will. You can see a more aggressive, stand in different, members of ASEAN. But you have to do that together.
We've got 9 minutes to go, and I'd love to hear from the young, the youth, because I'm told that a lot of the delegates here in this fourth round are people with the young ones, the Gen Zs, the millennials. Can you raise your hands? I'm not going to call you unless you come over and say you've got a question. Sige na, magtanong naman kayo. Ayan, please, I got two. Yes, if I can take the one in the black sweater with the glasses, and I'll take the one in blue, sir. And if a lady wants to raise her hand, I got you, I got one there. A lady, if I can, on table 20. That's okay? All right, so 3, Okay, let's go.
Well, thank you for coming to Philippines. I'm Miles Ballestar, a pioneering batch cohort of Master in International Business Law with my mentor, Dr. Raul is here. Speaking of international law, Ms. Cathy Yang, I would like to address this to the United Nations, MANAS. I'll be speaking with the case of the Nauru and also simultaneously the case of Marshall Islands, because navigating with the cyber expert, by 2035, it will reach the Philippine oceans, the testing of the nuclear. I know that the United Nations is working on this, but what I would like to know, the question is, where are we now in the partnership of the European space data, utilizing as the tool and mechanism of analytics to be able to see the sustainability and the human displacement when there's a crisis? I also placed the question on the board, and I would like to know, where are we now with the partnership and alignment, a regional framework repository addressing this, taking the case of the Nauru, of the deep sea mining of the nodules, and the Marshall Islands being displaced, and lots of Filipinos are also being affected with it.
Neha.
Well, I have to regretfully say that the initiative of the UN that I am part of does not deal with the treaties and conventions, but COP30 is going on in Belém in Brazil right now. And the what we call SIDS, the Small Island Developing States, are a very strong stakeholder group. Even at the last COP, I think SIDS were a very formidable group, and their sort of like lobbying and kind of like putting their facts and the issues in front led to the development of the fund, the climate fund, which developed nations are supposed to put funding into, so that green technologies and dealing with the climate crisis that Pacific Islands and many other developing countries are facing can be dealt with, so that the developing countries and the Pacific Islands and the small islands don't bear the cost of climate crisis that is very much created by, by the developed countries, right? So, but I would say keep your eyes out on what happens in Belém. The COPs is starting today. And I don't think that our Pacific Islands, Marshall Islands, and the the ones that you mentioned will keep silent. They are very vocal, and I think that some agreement should emerge on the next steps in terms of managing the displacement due to the rising sea levels and the deep sea mining, and so on.
All right, we have 5 minutes, so keep your question short if you could. The gentleman in blue, go ahead, please.
Hello po. I'm Matthew Galang from Ateneo John Gokong Way of School Management. My question is, how can government and businesses adapt to the growing influence of the youth population, and in what ways can young people take an active role in addressing navigating future disruptions?
Who'd like to take that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Again po, how can government and businesses adapt to the growing influence of the youth population, and in what ways can young people take active role in addressing and navigating future disruptions?
And he specifically asks the young. How can the young help? Jericho. Dr. Panitan, yes, go ahead.
I think the question is how to work with
Yes.
Yes.
people, young people, right?
Yes.
In
As a
this,
stakeholder in the whole
Yeah.
collaborative effort.
yeah. I
Yes.
think one of the very interesting challenges for Thailand is how to allow young generation or people in general to participate in this Thai-Cambodian conflict or war. I call it war, but Thai people don't like to call it war, but we are at war, I told them. There are many ways to do that productively. You know. But now, if you don't manage it productively, it can be nasty. It can turn too nationalistic. So I think, number one, leadership is critical. You must have a leadership in leading these enormous forces that the public, the new generation have. They went to borders with their own weapons, with their own equipment, with their own high-tech, cameras, drones. They can fly their own drones to challenge the Cambodian soldiers. So if you don't manage that, you increase the risk. But if you can manage that well, then it could be a pressure against the threat. You need a better system. So I think he's correct. The challenge of our time is how to work together, to avoid total destruction, to avoid the collapse of the system. We have not yet find a better ways. We are now catching up, at least in the cyber security issues, we're catching up. But I think if we create a new platform, a new space for these private enterprises, young generation to use their forces online, new platform, real time. I think we can manage the risk. They can monitor the risk 24 hours for the government. The government sleeps at night, most of offices anyway, except mine. So the youth can stay up all night monitoring what's going on across the globes, across the borders. We can have surveillance systems, but you have to man it. You have to have people to look at this. You have to have analysts around the clock. They can fill up that gap. And I think once you do that, we will redesign as we go. We are now moving lastly into a new global order. I hope we do not repeat the same mistakes in the last 2 world wars. My good friend, wrote a new book that we have a way. Professor Amitav Achayar, with his new book, The New Global Order. He just came back from India, briefing the Indians about how to work together in the new global order, not led by the European powers anymore, not led by the US or China. It will lead by the multiple powers together with multiple civilizations that do not want total destruction. So
It's really a clarion call. What I'm getting here is it's a call to action from each one of you here on stage. And the questions that our young people have, it's very inquisitive. And I see that the desire to help is there. And you know now that there are geopolitics that we have to deal with, sometimes so difficult to solve on our own. It truly is. That's why we've spoken about collaboration and also a really great case that it can happen, it can be done, but we all need each other. So it must be done. That's what Dr. Panitan says. And I'm reminded that it can and it must, because if we don't, it's your future, guys, at the back of this room. You're going to be at the front of this room in maybe a couple of years. But this is just the first session. So I hope that it's been very enlightening, as it has been for me. Very, very touchy topic, but I hope that you keep the questions coming online, or maybe raise your hand, garner up a little bit more courage and be heard. I know that you're raising your hand, maybe in the next session, sir. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your presence and your time. Let's all have a photo together.
Thank you very much. That concludes the morning session of Day 1 of the Asian Forum on Enterprise for Society. AFES resumes at exactly 1:15 p.m. Meantime, enjoy your lunch, ladies and gentlemen. Again, your feedback is very important to us. Scan the QR code on your tables now and let us know what you think. Who knows, you might also win in our raffle. Your response automatically qualifies you for our raffle draw later on. Thank you very much.